This is somebody that I have personally wanted to meet and speak with for many years now. He helped with electing Donald Trump and on the 2020 campaign, and he's had a huge influence on the Hispanic community and helping them see the value of conservative values. And so, Steve Cortez, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Stephen, great to be here. Nice to meet you virtually, and hopefully we'll meet in person soon. Love to meet patriots out there who are fighting for this country, and you're certainly one of them.
Yeah. So, just some background. Let people know what was your involvement with the Trump administration
Sure.
and his election campaign.
You bet. So some folks out there, by the way, might know me from my television career. I've been on cable news just about every day for the last 15 years. But the beginning of the first half of that roughly was not in politics. I was in business news. So I was a Wall Street guy. I was a trader, traded for some of the biggest hedge funds in the world. And then I also appeared frequently every day on CNBC and was in fact part of the team for the Fast Money franchise. So I was on the Fast Money halftime report and then the 5 p.m. Eastern time show. So some folks might remember me from those days. Wasn't talking politics, was just debating tickers and markets. And that's where I learned the craft, though, of television. I had moved over to Fox News mainly to do the same kind of thing at Fox Business, to be a markets commentator. When this orange guy came down the escalator and wowed a lot of the political world and won me over, quite frankly. So I wasn't in politics, wasn't planning on getting into politics. But Stephen, I was so inspired by him and so persuaded by him that I started saying really good things about him and about his candidacy on Fox News as often as I could. And so I started weaving a lot more policy into my market discussions. And before very long, got his attention. He got a hold of me and asked me to join the team, which I did in 2016 as a volunteer, by the way. My wife wasn't terribly happy because I left a pretty good paying gig at Fox to take a free unpaid gig with Donald Trump. But I thought it was so important to try to save this country, and I so believed in what he was enunciating and the agenda he was promoting for the country. So did that, and then slowly got out of the Wall Street world and to the point where I'm now all media and politics full time, and that included also a stint at CNN. Believe it or not, President Trump asked me during his administration to go to CNN and effectively work for CNN as his voice on the air. So I was on CNN primetime every night for about 2 years, which, given my right-wing views, you can probably understand was not an easy job. And I was often on those panels where it was, seven liberals and me, and I was sort of the heel, to use a wrestling term, a pro wrestling term for CNN. But regardless, I've been, as I said, full-time now for several years in media and politics, including President Trump's reelection campaign. I've also worked on some other significant gubernatorial and Senate campaigns, people like J.D. Vance, who I helped get elected in Ohio. So it is now my full-time vocation is politics and media.
Interesting. So you got into it because you got inspired. I got into it because I was so grossed out by watching
Mm,
Congress just give away our money to other people and all the insider trading and so that's what got me in. But I'm also inspired in different ways. One of the reasons that I wanted to have you on is I used to watch your whiteboard breakdown
mhm.
of like economic news, anomalies in the election, voting patterns, things like that. And I would tell my wife, "Oh my gosh, this guy's so brilliant. I would love to meet him one day and get the opportunity to speak with you." So right now, there's a lot of people worried about the economy. Are we heading
Sure.
into a recession? Is the stock market at all-time highs and about to go higher? Is it going to drop? And so, from a economic, political point of view, how do you personally see the U.S. economy, and where do you see it going?
Yeah, there's really two economies, and I'll explain what I mean by that going on right now. And the one for regular working class people is pretty terrible. But first, just thank you for your kind words about the whiteboards, about the chalk talks, as I call them. Just funny, quick story. I started doing those during the campaign in 2020, and the reelection campaign for the president. We had two extremely advanced, very fancy, very expensive studios. And so we mostly would do our production stuff there. And it was, very high level, highly produced videos. But then I started doing these whiteboard videos with literally my camera phone and an intern holding it. And those videos went way more viral than the slick, highly produced ones, believe it or not. These, videos that, basically anybody could make in their basement. And it just became kind of a thing. And I'm an ex-jock. I played football my whole youth all the way through college. And so the idea of chalk talks and coaches, just appealed to me. I think it appeals to a lot of folks out there, especially a lot of the ex-jocks. So it's become something I'm kind of known for. And, I'll be in airports and I'll have people yell across to me, "Hey, chalk talk." So it's gratifying, and I still keep them going. To answer your question regarding the economy, I think there are a lot of ways to economies right now. What I mean by that is there is a lot of inflation going on, and I don't mean just inflation in prices, which is, of course, really significant of all the goods and services of things you need in your life, but there's also inflation of assets, things like farmland, gold, crude oil, the stock market, all of them being inflated. So the stock market's at all-time highs, but I do not believe that is reflective of a really strong Main Street economy. Instead, I think it's reflective of a Fed, which has suddenly gotten very easy, which has really backed off the fight from against inflation. And I think, by the way, for political reasons, because I believe, unfortunately, I hate to be this cynical, but I think that Jerome Powell, lifelong Washingtonian, I think he's a very political operator and manipulator in many ways, is going to do everything possible to try to reelect Joe Biden. And they're of the belief that a soaring stock market is probably a positive for Biden. And frankly, it probably is, right? It does make people feel better to see the stock market at all-time highs. But Stephen, here's the unfortunate reality. For most Americans, the stock market being at highs doesn't have much relevance and effect on their day-to-day life. That's just the reality. For very wealthy people who own a lot of assets, yes, it's fantastic. And then the already successful are getting more successful. But for regular working class folks, they don't own a lot of stocks. If they do own stocks, probably in their 401k, so it's not something they're going to touch day to day. It's down the road for retirement. And the unfortunate reality for those folks, for working class people, for the vast millions and millions of Americans who don't own significant assets, for those folks, their real wages have gotten crushed under Joe Biden. And that's just reality. That is not my opinion. Okay, that is the data. That is the on-the-ground evidence. And what I mean by real wages, meaning your pay adjusted for inflation. So it really is, real wages is really a gauge of standard of living. I mean, it's another way of just saying that. How well are you living? How much buying power do you have? And the reality is, our standard of living has been going down aggressively under Joe Biden, because even if your paycheck is getting bigger, and I hope it is, it's not getting bigger at the pace it needs to adjust and keep pace with the cost of goods and services in your life. And so I'm very worried about inflation. And I'm worried that the Fed, again, is purposefully taking a break from fighting against inflation for politicized reasons. And regular folks out there are really, really struggling in this economy. It's very hard for them to afford, forget about the luxuries. It's hard for them to afford just the necessities of life. And to give you some evidence on that, my organization, the League of American Workers, which is a C4 advocacy group, we're doing a lot of polling of the battleground states. And we just polled Georgia, which may well determine the outcome of the 2024 elections. And we asked them their most significant, number one, we just asked them, what's your most important issue? Economy was far and away number one, immigration number two, but economy, number one issue for them. And then within the economy, we said, what are your biggest concerns? And the number one concern by far, the most cited answer, was the price of food. So think about that. I mean, think about how worrisome that is. People are worried that they can't feed their families, Stephen. And in an overwhelming way, they responded this way in this key swing state of Georgia. So stock market's at all-time highs. Things are very rosy for a certain element of the very small numeric element of society. But for the masses, unfortunately, it's a slog right now.
Gotcha. Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense, because I'll talk to Democrat family members or people through work, and they're usually fairly affluent, and they're like, "What are you talking about? Joe Biden is crushing it. My 401k is really healthy. And these are people, they're already locked in on their mortgage at cheap rates.
Right.
They make a good income, and so in their mind, it's really great. But then you talk to, let's say, like a lower income family, or even middle class family. Yeah, you're right. They're like, man, gas and food like is just eating up so much more of my money than it used to, and
Yeah.
their wages aren't going up. And so is there a way to maybe on a macros level with a new administration to positively affect that, or is this going to take years and years to work through some of this inflation damage?
Sure. Well, I would say both. Yes to both. Yes, we can absolutely start to fix things, but it won't be easy. Okay. So, yes, it's going to take a very long time, unfortunately, because when you've made a mess this big, There's no easy or super fast ways out, but there are fixes. And by the way, I'm glad you brought up that point, Stephen, about housing, because I think that's so important. So yeah, for folks who are already own a home, and I have a low mortgage rate locked in, yeah, life is good for them. The value of their home is going up. They don't have an onerous mortgage to carry. But think about somebody who's trying to buy a home. Think about that young family who just had children or just got married and wants to buy a home. It's almost impossible for them right now to number one, save up a big enough down payment. But even if they can get the down payment, to then afford the interest rates that they have to pay right now. And for a median priced home in the United States, which is around $400,000 nationally, and obviously there's huge variation depending on geography. But for a median priced home in the United States, the monthly mortgage tab that you have to pay has literally almost doubled under Joe Biden. And that's assuming that you had the down payment. So if you put 20% down, finance the rest. When Joe Biden took office, your monthly mortgage was $1,700 a month. Now that's a lot of money, but most American families could afford that when Biden took office. It's now $3,200 a month. So it has almost doubled under Joe Biden. And most American families cannot afford $3,200 a month to pay down every single month on their mortgage. And again, that's assuming they had the $80,000 to put down for the down payment. So housing affordability, as tracked by Goldman Sachs, massive prestigious Wall Street firm, has never been worse. Never. So according to they have a housing affordability index, and we are at the worst levels of all time because the prices of houses stay high and interest rates have stepped up. So that's tangible, real world kitchen table consequences of terrible policy. So to answer your question about what can we do to what are the right policies? Okay, so how do we start to fix this? Well, the first thing is we have to stop this absolutely exorbitant level of borrowing and spending at the federal level, because that is the primary driver of the inflation, which is so punishing in our lives. If you want to know why gasoline and eggs and milk and everything in your life, and by the way, services are even stickier to that inflation. So things like healthcare and haircuts. Why is everything so expensive? Primarily because of what Joe Biden has done with a lot of complicit Republicans, unfortunately, playing along with just absolutely exorbitant borrowing and spending. We ratcheted our borrowing and spending up to warlike levels during the COVID panic. And I think it was a panic. We didn't have to do that, but we did. And we haven't gone back down. I mean, that's the reality. Joe Biden is still spending at wartime like levels, even though there is no panic right now, or at least there shouldn't be, right? There is no COVID emergency or lockdowns or anything like that. So it's totally unsustainable. But I'm confident that if President Trump does win re-election, and I'm going to do everything I can to help him win re-election, that if he gets in again, that we're going to see the kind of economic policies that he instituted in his first term. Because the first 3 years of his tenure before the COVID panic were really a tremendous track record of economic and financial success for this country, and especially for working class people. That was the best news of all, as everybody was doing well, but it was working class folks, people who aren't credentialed, who don't have college degrees, who aren't of the managerial elites. Those were the folks who were seeing the biggest wage gains. Everyone was doing well, but they were doing the best, the people who needed the help the most. I think we can return to those days, but listen, it won't be easy, okay? Because we've gone on an absolute fiscal bender. And when you go on that kind of a bender, the hangover is inevitable. And we are going to have to deal with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I had Trump's economic advisor Stephen Moore on a few days ago, and he was saying that just based on the direction of the country, we're going to easily be over 36 trillion in debt by the time January comes around. So whether it's Biden or Trump running the country, the debt, like you say, they're just spending like crazy. And the other thing he pointed out was typically within the United States, when there is some kind of national emergency, a war, or whatever, the government usually starts to pay down debt. And in this case, they were just spending like it was their job. And that's where things really got out of control. But I think, like Ronald Reagan said, was life better under me or this other person, and I think a lot of the working class Americans can honestly say they were paying less taxes, food was more affordable, gas was more affordable, you could buy a house, the interest rates weren't crippling. And so I think there's almost, I don't know another word for it, Steve, there's almost a nostalgia to get back to that.
That's
I
right.
think maybe that's the
No,
best.
there is, and that emotional response is important, of course, right? I mean, we are, just to an extent, emotional beings. Now we have to also translate that into the intellectual plan, okay, of how do we get there? This is our aspiration, this is our goal. We have nostalgia for it, right? We want those days again. We want that 2019 Trump economy. We want real wages galloping higher again. So it's great to have those feelings. Now let's translate the feelings into actions, into plans and intelligent designs and actions. And I think we can do that. And by the way, nobody better to help do that than Steve Moore. I'm glad you had him on. He's a good friend of mine. We're both Chicagoans originally, and he is just a sharp guy and somebody who is able to explain very complex economic um, uh, philosophies to the layman, in a way that you don't have to be an economist or a Wall Street trader like I used to be to understand. So he's a great resource and somebody that I know President Trump thinks really highly of. And whether he's just an informal outside advisor like he was last time, or whether he actually joins the administration, either way, I think he'll have a lot of influence over what we can do. And to that point of the debt, right, of the 30, yeah, and I think he's exactly correct. I think right now it's just over 34 trillion in debt. It'll be by the time the new president is inaugurated, which I hope will be Donald Trump, $36 trillion in debt. The problem there, it's even worse than that number just being so gargantuan, because at higher interest rates, of course, just debt service costs have become now the largest single expenditure of the federal government, larger even than the defense budget of the United States. So, I mean, think of how massive and, in my opinion, bloated, too big, the defense budget is. But as much as we spend on defense, interest on the debt is now overtaking, and this has just happened, overtaking defense as our largest expenditure. And if we don't start to have some fiscal discipline, that number is not going to go down. It's only going to continue to go up to the point where it will eat up eventually the entire federal budget. And the answer can't be, well, then we just borrow more. No, because then that actually, right, the problem gets worse and worse. I mean, you don't fight the drug problem by taking more drugs. Okay, so that's the reality. But again, I don't want to be too pessimistic, because I do think we can get out of it. And I think a big start would be electing President Trump, making sure that we take the Senate, and making sure that we keep the House of Representatives. And I think we can begin the process of economic healing and economic renewal. But no one, I don't think, should be under any illusions. It's not going to be easy. That's the reality. And unfortunately, I think, again, that the Federal Reserve, and I'm super critical of the Fed generally and of Jerome Powell specifically, I think the Fed is acting in ways that are economically really irresponsible for political reasons, because they do not want Donald Trump back in the White House. And I mean, I understand that from their selfish position why they don't want that, because they want to protect the power of the Fed. But for the prosperity of the American people, what we need is certainly Trump back in power, and we need some fiscal discipline.
Yeah. Um, okay. Final question. I appreciate you coming on.
Of course.
Donald Trump has said we can't do anything to improve the country unless we win.
Mhm.
You, during your Chalk Talks, several times talked about the power of the Hispanic vote.
Yeah.
That is a huge voting bloc that typically leans a little bit more Democrat, maybe because of I don't really understand the reasoning why, but what are some of the things that you're doing and educating to capture more of that
Right.
Hispanic vote?
Yeah. So listen, the good news is here, the trend is our friend, okay, to use a market term, market phrase. We are winning Hispanic votes at increasing pace all over the country. And it's a phenomenon that is nationwide. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's a big part of what I did for Trump, especially in 2020. And I hope to be effective in this realm again this year. Historically, you're right. Historically, Hispanics have voted Democrat. However, I think that two things have happened. Number one is that the Democratic Party has become so radicalized in the 2020s. This is not your parents' or your grandparents' Democratic Party. These are not the party of JFK or Mayor Daley in Chicago. This is a very different, far more radical, I think in many ways, Marxist Democratic Party. That is not appealing to Hispanic Americans, who generally, particularly on social and family issues, tend to poll more conservatively than the rest of society. So they do not find a political home, and I think the Democrats, in many ways, have made them effectively political orphans. Now, that's only half the equation. The other side is, though, how do we attract them, right? And how do we earn their support and persuade Hispanics to come our way? Donald Trump has been a huge part of that. I think it is through cultural conservatism combined with populist economics. And I think that when we combine those two forces, those two agenda items together, we continue to earn Hispanic votes. And let me be specific about how we're doing that. So, for example, let's look at South Texas, the U.S.-Mexico border region. And of course, nobody in America is feeling the pain of Biden's border chaos more than the folks who actually live down there in the Rio Grande Valley, almost all of whom are Hispanic American citizens. And when we look, for example, at Starr County, which is on the U.S.-Mexico border, it's the most Hispanic county in America, Stephen. It's almost 100% Hispanic. It's like 96% Hispanic. In 2016, Donald Trump lost Starr County by 60% to Hillary Clinton. So Starr County voted, as it usually did, incredibly Democratic. However, 4 years later, fast forward to 2020, after 4 years of President Trump's leadership, after getting control over the border, after insisting on American sovereignty, after promoting traditional values that a lot of bad hombres rallied toward, he didn't win Starr County, but he only lost it by 5%. So he rallied 55% in just 4 years. Now, I think he's going to win Starr County this time. I think he actually flips it to win it. And by the way, right next to Starr County is Zapata County, which is almost as Hispanic. It's about 88% Hispanic. He did win Zapata County, and similar kind of, not quite as dramatic as Starr County, but from 2016 to 2020, he increased his share there 38% in South Texas. So there's a lot of bad hombres, a lot of proud Latinas who are starting to come our way. We have to continue the outreach to them to persuade them that we deserve their vote, that we want to earn their vote. And I firmly really believe this, that because of Hispanics demographically are by far now the largest minority group in America, still growing dramatically in this country. I really believe that Hispanics can form the key pillar of a lasting right-wing populist nationalist dominance in American politics. That Hispanics are just going to be a critical element of that, and I hope to be part of that movement.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you know, are any of Donald Trump's rallies or speeches being translated into Spanish and pushed out?
Yes, yeah. So, and pretty aggressive operation there. And I also know that, for example, looking at the battleground states, Arizona is the most Hispanic of the battleground states, and Arizona is going to be a huge focus. And yes, including Spanish language, including lots of Hispanic outreach, lots of in-person events. So listen, this is going to be a really, really busy year, and Hispanics are going to be a big part of the focus if we want to win.
Great. Well, I know you're busy. I know you got a hard out. I want to respect that. Thank you so much for coming on, Steve. If people want to follow you and keep in touch online, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast and doing the important work you do for trying to save this country of ours. So yeah, please follow League of American Workers, which is my nonprofit advocacy group, amworkers.com, amworkers.com. If you're so moved, consider donating to our group. And then you can also find me on social media. I'm on the Twitter, the X, at Cortez Steve, Cortez with an S, at Cortez Steve. Appreciate it, Stephen. Thank you.
I'll make sure to put that down below. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.